What's up, everybody? This is Mario, and I'm back with another episode of Endurify. And today, I want to talk about our group coaching call that I just had, where I had a group of athletes who are competing in the Half Ironman Des Moines this Sunday. And many of them, this is their first time. And so a lot of them are, nervous, they're excited, they're worried, they've got all of these pre-race jitters. So in the call, I focused on a couple of different things. We talked about 6 tips for coping with pre-race jitters, the number one skill that Michael Phelps used to win 23 gold medals that you can apply this weekend, had a few final reminders, and then just opened it up for questions and support from the group. And so just kind of starting off, I just asked them to describe how they're feeling using 3 adjectives. And the main ones that kept coming up were excited, nervous, and scared. Those are the main ones. We also had emotional. There was a few different ones, but those were kind of the main things. And so from there, we started to talk about, kind of what do people do to overcome pre-race jitters? And we had a lot of good examples of what people like to do, but I shared 6 different things that I focus on. And those are, number one, know that everybody experiences it and it can actually be a positive thing. So this is one thing, if you almost expect that you're not supposed to be nervous, you're not supposed to experience these pre-race jitters, it can actually work against you because this is something that affects everybody. And that's what I told them is I've done almost 10 different probably more than 10 different triathlons, many half Ironmans. I've done a full Ironman. I've done all these different events, but I still get nervous just because that's just the pre-race jitters. And so that can actually be a positive thing. Then next, I just told them that you need to remind yourself of why are you doing this. When I did the 5-day challenge a couple months ago, we started with why are you doing it? And I had them write it down. So now that you're a couple days out is the perfect time to remind yourself of why you're doing it. So we talked through that. Then we talked about focusing on what you can control, focusing on the controllables, because a lot of people are nervous and worried about the weather. People are nervous and worried about wetsuits. They're nervous and worried about all of these different things, but guess what? You can't control those things. All you can control is how you respond to them. All you can control is your attitude, your nutrition, your pacing. Those are different things that you can control on a daily basis and during race day that are going to impact your performance. Then the next thing is listening to music. So, a lot of people have pump up songs that they listen to. Some people have songs that help them relax. Based on whatever you need, it's always a good idea to have a little pre-race playlist to kind of just cool down or get yourself pumped up for the race. Then the next one, number 5, is just breathe. So I'm a big believer in meditation. It's something that I do on a daily basis, but I always meditate before my races as well because it helps me just kind of be focused on the present moment and, focused on my breath, focused on my effort, focusing on all of those different things. And then finally, number 6 is I told them to look for examples of I'm ready instead of I'm not ready. And I've talked about this on the podcast, but when you get closer to race day, you start to think about, I don't know if I'm ready for this. And if you say, I don't know if I'm ready, then your mind is going to look for examples of that being true. And it's going to be a negative thing. But if you go into it with this thought process of I'm ready for this, then your mind is going to look for all of those different examples of being ready for race day. So that's kind of the last thing that's super important is just look for examples of I'm ready instead of I'm not ready. So that was like our first section on 6 tips to cope with pre-race jitters. And then from there, I started to talk about this question of what can Michael Phelps teach us about preparing for a race? Now, Michael Phelps is he's won 23 gold medals. He's one of the greatest Olympians of all time. And, there's a number of just physical traits that went into that, right? He's like massive. He's got super long arms, broad shoulders, long legs, big feet. But it wasn't just the physical traits and the physical training that set him up for success. A big part of it was his mental training and his mental game. He was far superior at his mental game than any of the other athletes that he went up against. And that's because his coach was a big believer in it, and his coach started him on this process when he was like 13 or 14 years old. And so I went into his own mental training and talked about how his coach, Bob Bowman, instructed Phelps to watch a mental videotape of his races every day before he went to sleep and when he woke up in the morning. He would visualize every aspect of swimming a successful race, starting from the blocks and culminating in a celebration after the race was won. Bowman would instruct Phelps to put in the videotape during training sessions to help motivate Phelps to push harder. So he would kind of visualize every single small detail of swimming a successful race, starting from the blocks and then culminating in that celebration. So, what I talked about with our athletes is, visualize yourself from the time that you wake up to crossing the finish line. And eventually, Michael Phelps, kind of after going through this process year after year, week after week, in his training, from the time that he went to bed and the time that he woke up, he basically had this quote where he said, any small thing that could go wrong, I am ready for, because he had practiced it, he had visualized it, and he had gone through it in a very specific way. And that's basically, which is when you kind of start by visualizing and thinking through the entire day from the time that you wake up until the time that you kind of cross the finish line. What you want to do is you want to try and use all 5 senses and think about how will things smell, feel, taste, sound, and what will you see. And the main thing that you want to do is you first want to go through race day as a perfect day and imagine executing and feeling perfectly. And then you want to run through some scenarios that you might have to deal with on race day that are less than perfect, and you want to see yourself overcoming those. So it's, first visualize it going perfectly well in as much detail as possible, and then start to think of a couple of different scenarios that might pop up that are not perfect, that are obstacles, that are difficult, but see yourself overcoming those. And so we started to talk through some of those different examples. And then finally, I closed it out with an exercise that I've talked about on this podcast, which is the Think, Talk, and Act podcast. The Think, Talk, and Act framework. And that's because even after I walked people through first close your eyes, visualize it going well, visualize obstacles and see yourself overcoming them. I just asked this question, does anybody have this thought of but what if blank happens, right? What if, my water gets in my swim goggles? What if I get a flat tire? What if, what if I come out too fast on the run? Those are all of the different things that could go wrong. Pretty much everybody had 3 or 4 different things that were personal to them of things that they were worried about happening. Some people were worried about getting elbowed or scratched or, hit during the swim because they've never done an open water swim. Some people were just worried about the weather. What if the weather, cancels part of the race and I can't finish? What if I come out too fast on the run and I end up having to walk because I haven't done my nutrition properly, right? There's all of these different things. So just like I talked about on the podcast, if that happens, you need to go through and proactively plan for how are you going to address it. So first, when you think, you want to list out what are those things that I'm secretly worried about happening. Write that down. Then next, write down 2 positive things that you can say to yourself if it does happen, and then finally, one positive thing that you'll do if it does happen. And so by following this process, you don't eliminate the worries, but what you do is you feel a little bit better about them because you know what you're going to do if they do happen. So it's kind of planning for those worst case scenarios. So that was kind of the final exercise that I did with the group tonight. And then we just opened it up for questions. There were lots of kind of logistics questions and different things like that. And the group was able to answer them. But basically, we had a great coaching call. And I feel like I was able to help them prepare for race day as much as I could, and that makes me feel good. It makes me feel excited for them, and I'm excited to see how all of these athletes do. So just to kind of recap what we talked about, were just 6 different tips to deal with and cope with those pre-race jitters. We talked about how important visualization is and how important it is to see things going well and then see some obstacles that could pop up and see yourself overcoming them. And then we listed out some of those worries, and we listed out things that you can think, talk, and act. And I think it was a good use of time, and people were excited. So that is basically what I have for today. I hope that helps, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow.